And so she's eaten about 6 seeds of this, which means that because she's eaten 6 seeds of the underworld, she has to stay under the earth 6 months out of the year. But the other 6 months, she can come back to her mother. And this is one of the stories that we have in the old stories about why we have the seasons. We have the seasons, fall, winter, when Persephone, the bride and the queen of the underworld, is with her king Pluto in the underworld. And then when she returns to her mother in the spring and summer, the earth is rebirthed. The interesting part of this story is that in the snatching, in the taking of Persephone when she was unwilling, and in the probable rape of Persephone, which is not something that anybody likes or approves of, she does become knowledgeable, and she does attain power. She does attain power, and she changes. And she has the ability to change the way things are being done in the underworld. And another theme and another shall we say fruit that we see in a lot of the stories for this time of the year is also the pumpkin. We began to talk about Halloween a little earlier. Halloween always occurs the night before, obviously, November 1st, and it's always considered to be All Hallows Eve. It's All Saints Eve, All Souls Night. And supposedly, and this is why the children dress up in costume, it's the time when the dark comes out, the monsters and the goblins and the ghosts and the witches. And it's a very ancient celebration. They didn't really celebrate Halloween in the ancient Celtic times, but this is about really inviting the shadow in. That's the theme of Halloween, really, is inviting the bad witch in, or inviting the wicked king, or inviting the ghost in, or the monster in, so that we become more balanced, and so they get their day in court, so to speak. So they're not angered, so they're being paid homage. And one of the fruits that are associated with Halloween, it's really more of a vegetable, is the pumpkin. And the pomegranate that we talk about in the story of Persephone is more the feminine symbol for looking at the shadow. And the pumpkin is really very much the masculine symbol for looking at the shadow and for the profound ability to become a pumpkin. It's interesting if you really read about pumpkins, that in order to get a pumpkin, very few of the flowers are fertilized. And it has to be at exactly a certain time, at exactly a certain point. And that's why it's so unique, and it's almost like a mutated kind of vegetable, because pumpkins become very big. It's very much associated with masculine sexual energy. In fact, there's a lot of old stories and superstitions about how if men eat pumpkin seeds, they become more fertile and more potent. And it's always very interesting, because this is one of the vegetables that comes out during the time of the year, and it's one of the things that's presented to the people of the dark as a gift, saying, you're powerful too, you're potent too, we acknowledge you and we invite you in. Another story that moves along with the theme of Scorpio, and the reason we use these stories is because there's always an image or a life theme. You see, for example, if you look at the story of Persephone that we've just spoken about, there is the theme of her being snatched and possibly raped as she moves into the underworld, which has been more and more an awareness that we've been seeing in the news of the last few years and in many years to come. And that's really also a process of becoming more aware, of becoming more conscious. In order to do that, we have to move through that. And so, many times in a Scorpio's life, they might have had a theme like this. They might have experienced, a person even who has a strong Pluto placement in the chart, they might have experienced early childhood abuse. They might have experienced early sexual abuse. And these stories are not uncoincidental. They do very much associate with the different signs of the zodiac. There is another story, and actually it's the story of the Hydra. The Hydra was kind of like a Greek dragon, if you will. And the Hydra was one of many terrible monsters that the goddess Hera set upon the god Hercules to challenge him and to perhaps kill him so he would not stay powerful. And basically the way the Hydra was, that if anybody attacked the Hydra, that once you cut one of her heads off, 2 would grow in its place. And there's one wonderful story of Hercules who is fighting this Hydra, and he's very frightened because, if the Hydra bites you with her teeth, she can kill you. And it's like every time you cut a head off, remember this, there's 2 that come in its place. It's very much associated with the compulsive nature it's kind of like when someone's on drugs or cocaine. They have some cocaine, they want more. They have some more, they want double that amount. They have more, they want double that amount. So the Hydra is very much a symbol for the compulsive, addictive nature, which is why we associate it very much with the sign of Scorpio. And in one of the stories, what happens is he's trying to fight off this dragon, and she's at him, this dragon, and he's cutting the heads off, and he's cauterizing them with a torch, and he's beginning to beat her. But out of the corner of the scene of the picture comes the little Cancer crab, which the sign of Cancer or the crab represents the feeling nature, the sensitive nature. And this is Hera's animal. And he's coming in and he's nipping at Hercules' heels and nipping at Hercules' heels and trying to distract him from being able to kill the Hydra so that he gets bitten, so that he dies. And basically that whole story, that whole theme is about when we begin to allow the feeling, sensitive nature, emotional nature to come in, we begin to somehow suppress or control the Hydra or the compulsive addictive nature. And this is one of the challenges of the sign of Scorpio is, basically speaking, I'm not saying that every Scorpio is a drug addict or an alcoholic, but there is a compulsive nature to this personality. They're either workaholics, playaholics, if there's such a word. They'll have a lot of fun, they'll work hard, they'll be focused on one thing. They're very much blinders type personalities, and they'll stay with that. And any addictive behavior pattern really never goes away. Just like with the Hydra, if you cut one of her heads off, two comes out. But what you can do is you can suppress it or change it by really bringing in the feeling nature. And it's very interesting because as the story goes, he doesn't really kill the Hydra. What he does is he cauterizes all the heads, but the one head that can't be killed is still alive. And in the end of the story, he takes her to this mountain that's a cave, and he puts a stone in front of it, and it has like a hole at the top that allows the smoke from her breathing to come out. And so what he does is he doesn't really kill the Hydra in the story. He places her in a place where she can at any time erupt, just like a volcano. That is the image of a volcano, but that somehow it has been controlled. So this is one of the lessons about Scorpio. And generally speaking, when they hit around 40, 45 years of age, this is when they really begin to get the balance of the addictive compulsive behavior pattern with the other part. There's also the story of Shiva. Shiva is an East Indian male who has tremendous regenerating power, and this is quite positive. And again, this is one of the many wonderful things about the sign of Scorpio. They really have the ability to regenerate themselves as well as other people, to really inspire hope in people that there is a possibility that an individual can climb out of their darkness into light. And in the story, Shiva is always regenerating his power, and one of the things he has the ability to do is to turn those that are attacking him into a necklace. In other words, he doesn't really kill them, he just transforms them into something else. And what happens as he turns the ones that are attacking him into a necklace, he coils and he turns something else into something new. And so basically what we see is the theme in all the stories of Shiva is as he is being attacked or as the theme of destruction comes in, rather than fighting directly against it, he simply embraces it, perhaps puts it through his system and transforms it and creates something new. So it is the dance of destruction and creation, destruction and creation. Very much like when you hear about a forest fire and you hear about all the different things that are happening in the forest. The fire is burning and the trees are going down and the land is being killed and the animals are being run away or burned. But after the forest fire is finished, you begin to see within a few months or a few years new seedlings growing out of the forest floor. And these seedlings can only grow out of the forest floor by being licked by flames. And so this in nature is one of the themes of destruction and creation. Many times in a Scorpio's life, or a person who has strong Scorpio energy in the chart, if in their life they experience death not only of a business or of a relationship, but literal death, where someone very dear to them that meant a lot, or perhaps even someone who wasn't very dear to them, but who caused a great deal of distress in their lives. Every time they see that death or experience that death, within a very, very short period, there will be a birth. In fact, I had a woman in one of my lectures one day giving me the example of how, being a Scorpio that she is, when her father died in a hospital, many, many, many years ago. Her father died, I believe it was on November 20th. And on the day her father died, I guess she went into labor. And the following day, in the same hospital, she gave birth to twin Scorpio children. And it was really in the physical world a representation of what we're talking about is as you see a death or an ending in your life as a Scorpio person, even though it may feel as if it's devastating and that you can't go on, you know that that's going to be a signpost in the road that there is something new and wonderful coming. If you have dreams, anyone, they don't have to be a Scorpio, of death. People get frightened of dreams of death, and yet when you have dreams of death, that's a very good dream because it means there's about to be a kind of rebirth in your life. One other story we'll talk about, which involves the idea of what the Greeks called hybris or hubris. Sometimes it's pronounced either way. Hybris is basically the sin of pride against the gods, i.e., ego, is the story of Orion and Artemis. Orion was the great hunter. He's in the sky to this day with the 3 stars on his belt. And Artemis was the independent, young, gorgeous wanderer of the forest. She would always wander independently through the forest with her dogs, and she would wander through the sacred grove alone, not wanting to be bothered. Artemis is very much associated with the next sign of the zodiac, Sagittarius. And one day Orion, the great hunter, was bragging that he could outhunt Artemis, who was the goddess of the hunt. And so what happened, the gods sent the scorpion to kill Orion because he was boasting that he could kill any wild beast better and faster than Artemis. And she was a goddess, and so what he was committing at that point was hubris. And as a result of that hubris, he was destroyed. And this is one of the things. Once a Scorpio energy or a person who has a lot of Scorpio in the chart begins to experience success, and they ultimately will oftentimes experience success, once they've transformed and found their power and come into a place in their life where they're becoming successful, then the next running theme, probably for the remainder of the life, is about staying powerful but staying humble and not allowing the ego or the sin of pride against the gods to get out of hand. And this is the second choice, is to be conscious as to whether to do that or not. And it's basically kind of like the checkpoint after the age of 45 or 50. One more character. We will talk about one more of a feminine character. She's a very famous character, and her name is Medusa. Medusa was the wicked, not really wicked, actually, she was more predatory than anything else. She was the goddess with the snake head, and if she would look at you, she would turn you into stone. And she has, like Pluto, a lot of bad press. She was not very loved, but we must go back in her history to look at why she arrived to this terrible fate. Medusa had been a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful woman, and she had been caught making love in, I believe, Athena's temple with her lover. And Athena, when she found this out, she was incensed, and she cursed her and her sisters to become this horrible monster with snake heads. And she became very devouring and very destructive. But she was also, the reason this happened to her is she had been overcome by her passions. In other words, she hadn't really thought before her actions. And this is very much one of the themes with Scorpio is really the test of thinking before one acts. So it's quite interesting because in the old days, before they had telescopes, they only could see 7 planets, actually the Earth, the Moon, and 5 planets. And so in those days, the planet Mars was the ruler of the sign of Scorpio and the sign of Aries. And there is very often in life an affinity between Scorpions and Aries. And to this day, we oftentimes look at Mars as being their joint ruler. And one of the major tests of Mars, because Mars is the god of war and reaction, but Mars is also the god of strategy, is to learn how not to react to everything and learn how to think before one acts, to strategize, to plot out the plan before one acts. And this is one of the reasons that Medusa did suffer the fate that she received from Athena, because she really wasn't thinking about her actions. She was letting her primal instincts, her deep sexual instincts, to get in the way of her thoughts. And this is part of the challenge, too, of Scorpios, learning how to balance the passion and the physical with the emotion, with the intellectual and the spiritual, and is also a theme that we see whenever we see images like St. George killing the dragon, who's really suppressing the sexual power, St. Michael stepping on the dragon. These are all Libra and Scorpio myths, because at one time Libra was part of the sign of Scorpio. And so one of the challenges for these people too is to think before they act. And that's why all these mythologies seem to work. If you're going to capsulize the stories in one fell swoop here, we can say simply that by listening to these stories and thinking about these stories, because shamans are the Native American medicine men who can help make magic and help people become more powerful. Shamans are also associated with the sign of Scorpio. And shamans are powerful, and they have an insight into the other world and how life works. And so when we, as individuals, as Scorpios, or people who have strong Pluto in our charts, make the choice to be conscious, to pay attention consistently, not inconsistently, but consistently, we can, like the shamans, be in touch with life and death and know the process and understand it and experience life to its fullest. Now, what I'd like to do is look at rather quickly the different ways that the Scorpio personality manifests in different areas of life. Now, this material will probably be more applicable to someone who is born at the time that Scorpio is rising or on the ascendant. And this, of course, would have to be checked based on your time of birth. You can be any sign of the zodiac and have Scorpio rising. But this material is also very proper and very appropriate for the sign of Scorpio. And the first place we'll begin at is the body. We have basically discussed the parts of the body that the sign of Scorpio rules. To reiterate, that is the excretory or the reproductive organs. And in fact, when stress comes up, either in the area of relationships or business or whatever, one of the areas that will be affected will be the reproductive organs, like ovarian cysts, prostate, the large colon, digestion. These are all areas of the body that are affected, that are particularly affected if you're a Scorpio. Since this is a fixed sign, i.e., a person that has its own opinions about how things should be, generally speaking, the Scorpio body, or especially Scorpio rising, is rather square. Shoulders and hips about the same width, a powerful build. Sometimes the body has kind of an odd shape, like a long torso and short legs or short arms. Many times they'll have an exotic look to them, almost as if the eyes of the scorpion are on their face, more of an almond-shaped eye. Many times the skin will be, if there is a lot of Scorpio in the chart, a little coarser kind of texture. The initial impression they'll give to people is that they're quiet or even secretive, and they may appear hard to know, but once you know them and they move into your space and you know them, there's deep trust and love that they do stay very loyal and they stay with you through thick and thin. As far as the way they spend their money, cash flow, talents, skills, resources, we can put the sign of Sagittarius there. They're very talented in this area. They have tremendous vision. One of their great skills is they are great teachers, great trainers. They see ahead, in other words. They really, in order to do what they do and be successful at it, they truly have to believe in it, because the sign of Sagittarius is about believing in things. And there's a rather artistic side to this personality, too, in that whatever it is they are doing, it has to have the artistic inspiration that they need to have to keep them moving. They're great travelers. They oftentimes will spend their money on travel. They will be very lucky in the area of making money. It's the famous story of Midas, who, whenever he touched anything, it turned to gold. This is very much associated with Scorpio energy. They have the ability to do that. The way they communicate, the way they deal with immediate relatives or the experience of immediate relatives can be placed with the sign of Capricorn. The communication is rather reserved, generally speaking. They will take a lot in before they really make an opinion. This is why sometimes they appear to be non-trusting or not very open. They can be quite brooding in their communications, and they may be, at times, depending on the space that they're in, want to having a kind of depression and not being able to express themselves. They're probably, I would say, unless there's a lot of fire in the chart, not very spontaneous in their thought. They really have to chew it and think about it before they come up with the way things should be. But the thing that is truly remarkable about them is that once they have the opportunity to think about how things should work and be organized, they can come out in a beautifully organized way and have the entire game plan laid out. Sometimes their education is delayed. Sometimes they'll appear to be slow students in school. Sometimes they may even have learning disabilities. which really is something that a parent for a small child should really check. They may appear to be slow in school and not very bright, but what they're really doing, since we have the sign of Capricorn, which really takes things in and deliberates over it in this part of the horoscope, is that they really have to take it in and really feel it and experience it and have time. And this is a key thing. They have to have time to learn. They don't like to be pushed to learn. When they have enough time, they're really quite brilliant because they really are truly Scorpio. They research the entire genre before they make a decision. In the area of early home life, the early home experience, probably particularly the mother or the primary nurturing parent, we can put the sign of Aquarius there. They may have experienced one of their parents or the primary nurturer to be somewhat detached and unorthodox. They may have experienced their parent as being somewhat inconsistent. On the positive side, they may have experienced a parent to be very innovative, charismatic, inventive, revolutionary, and progressive. They may have experienced a home life in the early years that had a lot of changes, either moving around a lot or people coming and going inside of the house, or even explosive personalities in the house. And for a Scorpio that's rather fixed and likes to know what the schedule is, this is very, very difficult. They might have experienced a family that was rather extreme, very intellectual parts of the family and very unsophisticated parts of the family, so that there wasn't really any synthesis that was logical to them, which might have created in the early years a kind of confusion. They may be very, very good, since Aquarius is also the sign of the big dealers and big developers. They may be very, very good in dealing in development of land, commercial buildings, because this is also the house of real estate and how we handle our real estate. In the area of children and creativity and love and romance and sex, you can put the sign of Pisces there. They're very sensitive towards their children, and generally speaking, they birth very sensitive children, which Scorpio is a very sensitive sign too, but the difference between the energy of Pisces, which is on the house of children, and the energy of Scorpio is that Pisces is probably the most sensitive, and it might be that a Scorpio parent may not always think before they say something when they're upset, and it can deeply wound the child, and the child, as the result of that, can be very hurt. On the other side of that, it could suggest that the children of these people are very creative artistically, that they too themselves are creative artistically, that they're very good in music, theater, dance, acting, film, that they may have real ability to work with wine and to work with healing and massage and painting and water and aquatics and fishing and all of those areas. And that, in fact, when they're in love, they are in love. They are truly in romantic love. It may suggest, too, that since this is also the house that represents your lovers, that the lovers that you attract to them have a Dionysian quality in their life. In other words, they really, somehow in the relationship that you have with these people, they do take you to newer heights of love and romance, and that's really, once you've experienced that, it's very difficult to take anything less. It may also suggest that one of the gifts and talents that a Scorpio person holds is the gift of healing. And we do see this in this group of people, is that they are very gifted healers, and they may do the healing either directly in either more traditional medical way or the less traditional, and then they may do the healing in a very indirect way through the arts. In other words, through their paintings. When people look at their paintings, they somehow are healed. If we look at the way a person who particularly has Scorpio rising, also Scorpio people, handles work and service, you can put the sign of Aries here. They are good workers. They are good revolutionary starters. They're pioneering in the way they work. They can be very intolerant of people with whom they work, which is one of the reasons many times they work for themselves. They may have an element of impatience, having to wait to go through the systems at the workplace. They're ambitious. They have tremendous amounts of energy. They have good ideas. They're when they decide to do something, they're going to do it. And they may implement a lot of systems and techniques, but they must have someone who they can delegate to finish that for them. In the area of partners and partnerships, the way they are with partners, you can put the sign of Taurus there. They attract to them money partners and partners. They would prefer partners that are very fixed, who have fixed affections. They are very attracted to beautiful partners. A person must have some element of charisma about them. They can be very possessive about their partners, and they can attract to them partners that perhaps may be just as stubborn as they are. One thing about Scorpio people is they do not stay with people who they cannot respect. If a person cannot stand up to their energy, to their consistent asking of questions and expectations, then they just simply chew them up and spit them out. So they don't respect someone who shows weakness. So they really have to have strong partners to maintain a long-term relationship. In the area of how they handle money with others and how the ability to attract resources from others, you can put the sign of Gemini there. They're great fundraisers. These are people that can talk to people and get them to support causes that they believe in. They're wheeler dealers, so to speak. They can have 2 or 3 things going on at one time. Very, very good in investing in the area of communications, television, video, radio, anything that has to do with communications. They do very well in that area. They may do very well at working with 2 investments rather than 1, 2 different kinds of investments, one that meets their emotional needs and one that meets their intellectual needs. In the area of how they look at their philosophy, what their belief systems are, and how they dealt with their higher education, we can put the sign of Cancer there. It might suggest that many of their teachers were really mentors and mothers to them more than perhaps their own family members. It might suggest that their beliefs and their philosophy is rather conservative, and one of the big things they believe in is security, because the sign of Cancer is really the sign that rules security. They would have been nurturing in the educational area, and they would have had nurturing kinds of teachers. They would have had teachers that would have allowed them to learn, and they would have had teachers that would have been sensitive to their deep needs and sensitive to their particular skills and gifts. In the area of how they handle their career and what their ultimate public standing and reputation is, they really, when they achieve success, they really achieve it at a very large level, because the sign of Leo is here, which is the sign of the king or the queen. They really want to reach the top. This is a very ambitious group of people who not only wants to reach the top, but wants the acknowledgement that goes along with it, and expects the acknowledgement that goes along with it in high positions. This is oftentimes the house placement of the father. So they would have probably had a very strong father who perhaps had a very large heart, but perhaps might not have had time, or their father might not have had time to know them, because one of the myths of Leo is the search for the father. The father might have actually had some royalty in his or her bloodlines too, because the sign of Leo is associated with royalty. In the area of goals and friends and community and how you help your friends, you can put the sign of Virgo here. This would suggest that the friends of Scorpio people are oftentimes very loving and serving and very, sometimes even meek and timid, and many times a Scorpio personality will be the leader of their friends, especially when you watch little children. The little Scorpio child is the leader of the band of friends. They may be very, in terms of their goals, very interested in the environment, very interested in communications. They may serve the community in many ways, and this is one way they gather business for their businesses, by working in the community. They serve their friends, and their friends serve them. And they are very discriminating, especially if they've really learned about their power in choosing the right friends. And they're very choosy and picky about their friends. They're very selective, which is one of the reasons they many times move further in their life, because they really do not allow the wrong kind of personality to come in, because they are wanting to move ahead very quickly. And the last point of the horoscope, the 12th house, is the blind spot. And this is also the house of the spiritual treasure chest. You can put the sign of Libra here. One of the things about Scorpio people is they don't always listen to their own counsel. Libra is a sign of excellent counsel. Placed in the blind spot of the chart, their intuition may be telling them what to do, but their will is telling them to do something, and this is what gets them in trouble. They may choose the wrong relationships for this very reason. Their heart tells them one thing and their head tells them something else. They want to be so fair that sometimes they get themselves in trouble, because Libra is the sign of fairness and justice, and they are very concerned with fairness issues. One of the problems sometimes with Scorpio is wanting to get back at people who have been unfair to them, and one of the lessons is to learn to forgive and to love. And that's really the bottom line for this sign, is to make choices in the life that are the best choices possible for yourself and other people. If, in fact, it doesn't work out, the real test for Scorpio is learning to be loving in the face of major problems, and learning to move past that and continue to go on your path and listen to your source, because the 12th house is your source and your instinct and really great spirit or magic speaking to you. And once you start to listen to that and allow the will to step aside, you achieve great success in the life, and your life can truly achieve the wealth and riches that are your birthright.
Hello, this is Georgia Stathis. You've been listening to our archived series, Myths and Signs of the Zodiac, and we thank you. If you like what you heard and you'd like to know more and hear more, please go to our website at starcycles.com, where you can find an assortment of available tools, pieces of information, and things that you can use in your own practice or in your own study of astrology. Again, thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.